Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to WeatherBrains episode number 657. This is the pre-show magical part of the program where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say very, very outrageous things. This is for August 20th, 2018. We're getting close to, I could just feel fall getting so close. Got a surface front, Kevin, knocking on the door.
We had it last night. I woke up at like 4 o'clock and I rolled over as I usually do and checked radar. And there was a very thin little line coming across, a little boundary, and that was the front. And that's my favorite thing is a dry cold front. If you get a little roll cloud, that's the absolute best. But a dry cold front, you stand there and you feel the wind turn around and the AC comes on and it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's we're kind of excited. We do have we've had some severe weather west of where we are, including a few rare August tornado warnings, but they seem to be going downhill. So
here's the boundary.
Okay,
hey, look at that. Isn't that beauteous?
That's nice.
Wow.
So cool. There were like two little raggedy cumulus clouds on it, and that was it.
Wow.
4 o'clock in the morning.
Brian, what's on your mind, man? What's happening?
Did you include our guest? I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian.
That's all right. Go right ahead.
James, did you include our guest?
No, but I will.
He's standing by. Is that part of the problem that you're not inviting in the group, or?
I don't know. Bill Murray usually gets the guests on, and he just I don't exactly know how he does that. But I've got his email address.
Yes, please do that because he's there and he's waiting. But I just wonder if the difficulty comes that's coming later like that, or.
Let's see if this will work. So
we're about to find out because he's wicked smart. So it'll be a week from Tuesday before he gets on.
Yeah. But for those that don't know, that the higher the IQ of our guest, it takes longer to get him on the show. We don't know why.
Right.
Brian, is this also the longest contact we've ever had?
Yes. That's the show title, Live from Japan.
Okay. I like it.
I had a Bluetooth, but Bluetooth is just not good. It's not good. It's inconsistent. And if you got too many Bluetooth devices, and I've got a keyboard, 2 trackpads, these ear pods.
I think I see the problem.
Yeah, they don't like to be in the same room together. They don't play nicely together. And, you'll be working a trackpad and all of a sudden it just goes slow and the response is slow and it just stops and reconnects. And same thing with the audio sometimes. And Bluetooth has always been buggy. I've never had the top consistency with it. Kevin, I did invite him using the standard.
I just sent him a note.
Method that all I do is drop his email and invite him.
I know. I have this nagging suspicion that if you do it after everybody else, that's causing a problem. But I have nothing to prove that.
And I have put in the chat room the link that you can send him if you'd like.
And the last one I did was Ellen Baca, and she got in there and it wouldn't connect. She sent me a picture of the actual window sitting there, and it wouldn't finish. And then she came on her phone instead. But I see here in this thing I've got James added David Bodine to the Hangout.
Yes.
I mean, we can't explain these problems every time, but that's one suggestion that I make.
That's interesting, Kevin, because my comment says James added unknown to the Hangout.
Right. And that's the thing. Now, that's got to be the email address he has for his Google account or Google.
Yeah, it's the one
Plus.
I sent because I did a test with him last week. But maybe because you haven't communicated with him yet. I don't know. Brian?
Oh, I
could be.
I think going forward, you should invite the guest in the group and see what happens. I mean, when you do everybody, do you have like do you add each one of us individually, or do you have a
Yeah, you have to do it individually. But of course, you type a few letters of the email address and it kind of auto fills because everybody's in a, and I don't even know if they still have circles or whatever they use on Google Plus, or even if this thing is related to Google Plus, but the ones that the regulars on the show, it auto fills and it just knows. But usually if I put in somebody else's email address in there, it fills in with a name, and I don't think it did this time. Got a note from Kim. She is out to read. I'll read her email. This is very lame, but I'm just too tired to make it. For those that don't know, she her due date is September 12th. I mean, just getting close. We understand. Hope you have a great one. I'll probably be asleep pretty soon here. So yeah, it's she has been a trooper to be on as consistently as she has been on during this summer of pregnancy. Ooh, Rick's on the show with us tonight. So who's going to the National Weather Association annual meeting?
Me.
I will be there. Aubrey will be there. Kevin and Rick are not going.
I will not.
Boo.
So I have to be doing, Bill's doing this big weather fact. Bill was out here. I guess he won't be on the show tonight. Bill came by. We kind of went through the Weather Fest agenda. We're going to do 3 sessions. I'll be up there with Ginger Z. We'll do 3 sessions. This is for kids, and then I will be speaking around noonish in another room. Anyway, it'll be a busy day. I'll put it that way. So.
James, invite him again. You're using his email, right? He says he doesn't see it, and I'm asking him to double check his email.
Let me go back and grab that. Yeah, it typically fills in with a name if the system recognizes it, and this just has his email address. I'll invite him again.
Oh, wait a minute. I sent you the OU thing, didn't I? This might be my fault.
Right, because I get the idea that's not the email address he uses.
Hang on.
Yeah, I need the Gmail address.
This is my fault. Stand by. Copy email address.
Control C, Control V. They put a new light bulb in here, and it burned out the second time I turned it on.
My bad. There
it means. Okay. Yeah, that's what we need right there. Now, when I put this in here, it's gonna come up with a name, and it did. It came up with his name, and he should get it now. Now we're talking. Aubrey, what's on your mind? What's happening?
Hi, guys. Sorry I wasn't on last week. I have been knee-deep in graphics. We launched our new graphic package today.
Oh.
That's always fun. How'd it go?
It went good. Just a couple of small little kinks with the CSV, but just overall, for as much as we did, it went well, except I just figured out our 7-day has a completely different look to it because the graphics we downloaded from WSI, they didn't position the scene launch triggers right. So it basically covered up part of the color. So
Is your head exploding?
I'm just like, I'm sorry. I love these guys and we're being recorded. I just sent a strongly worded email with a little bit of feedback. But it has a completely different look.
You would have a lot of feedback for ours because we had new graphics and a whole new system and two stations. We had a Fox look and an NBC look, and it was nothing short of a disaster.
Well, that's why we can't launch our new boxes yet, because we're waiting for a patch because stations have had issues and we're not launching our new boxes yet, even though it takes us 20 minutes to record a 1-minute video.
Yep. And we got all ready to go, and then because they changed station graphics too, and then some pinhead at corporate decided that some shadow or silver highlight was in the wrong place on the logo somewhere, and that happened I think twice, where everybody was all raring to go, and they said no, we got to change this little thing.
I've been ready. I could have been ready for like 2 weeks ago, but I had to wait on news because of a corporate thing. But I've just been pounding away at graphics and every little stinking detail. I mean, I enjoyed it. You know, it's fun. It's kind of cool having, that much control. I like having control, and I had a lot of control over these graphics. So they look really sharp, but many nights with no dinner breaks. Nothing to eat.
The two things that I was looking forward to in getting rid of our old graphics package got worse in the new graphics package on ours.
Really?
Yes.
Oh. That's not good.
The NBC look, I don't even use the thing. Somebody, it looks like the one of the first people that said it, there's all this moving crap, sparkly, shiny, reflective, moving crap. All the boxes have to, and somebody said it looks like shards of glass flying all over the television screen. So I just blew past them. I don't even use them.
Well, let's see.
And just to warn you guys, we might have a few severe thunders that might require me to abandon ship temporarily. So,
and somebody's gonna have to pick up with David here because I have to go do the Fox show. I'm not ready.
Brian and Rick, be ready for duty here.
I'm in studio because I still have to. It's a working podcast tonight.
Working podcast could be a show title.
I like Live from Japan.
Rick, you know David?
That's even better.
Or no?
I don't think so.
And James, your pick that you sent me, when I bring it up, it just wants me to subscribe. It won't give me the article.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's poo-pooey. I'll send you. Let me check on that.
I didn't want you to think I'd ignore your email with your pick. It's just that it's. It comes up and I see the article, but then it kind of fades off, and the subscription thing comes up over the top.
Well, that's just really crummy.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I guess they're trying to monetize.
It was a Brian Norcross piece.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm seeing it okay. You should get a number of free articles,
Well, maybe I've been there too often then.
It's the Washington Post. You just go to another browser or something,
okay.
or hit what I always do is hit the reader button on Safari, and it often will bypass all that malarkey. But it was a Brian Norcross piece on people taking longer to react and judge odd digits. So you should be using even numbers and numbers ending in 5 in your forecasts.
That's not even.
Yeah, there's a bunch of voodoo in there. But,
Ooh, you know what I just saw? I just saw a tweet. Hang on. For the student conference at NWA, and guess who's the keynote?
who?
Dr. John Scala.
Oh,
No way.
Yes.
So why are they making me wear that stinking Swami hat? That's his job. I mean, all
That
right,
will
we
be
got a warning.
exciting.
Severe thunderstorm warning for Monroe County, Mississippi.
Right across the line, huh? Ooh.
Hey,
Yeah.
if he pops on, you guys holler. I'll be listening. I got to do some graphics here.
Yeah, I don't know what else to do. I have invited him. It might just be us. And by the way, welcome to our television viewers. It is now 30, almost 33 minutes after the hour. We are waiting to get our guest on, who is not on, which means it just might be us talking about us. And I will be somewhat limited in capacity here because of the weather situation here and dealing with emails from producers and social media things. So anyway, let's just get this thing started, and we'll make this thing fly. What was that?
Oh, sorry, that's our cleaning. I didn't have mute on.
Oh wow, sounded like
Trash can.
the world was ending. All right, so let's come over here and turn on some recorders here. Recorder number 1. And recorder number 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is WeatherBrains, episode number 657. The weekly show all about the weather. This is for August 20th, 2018. Thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. And Aubrey, you are back and you got your graphics ready and going on the air. You're
They've
done.
launched. Oh, I wouldn't say that, but they've launched. So yeah, now it's figuring out some kinks and then building up the stockpile back of graphics.
So explain this. Now, people don't know, people just watch television and they think you have this big staff that makes up these graphics. When you change graphics looks, this is not easy.
No, it's not easy. And in addition to our huge staff that puts all the graphics together, we also have a huge staff of hair and makeup and stylists who put us all together. So don't forget, we do have these massive staffs behind us.
We do?
Yeah, right. The voices in our head. So basically, when we get this new graphic package, they kind of give you a look. So they give you a background, they give you a banner, and they kind of give you a couple of, boxes or things to put together. And then they're like, here you go. So basically, I've put together every single one of our graphics. They'll give us a 7-day outline, but you're putting together the whole graphics package. So you're putting together every look, your radars, storm, hour by hours, forecasting graphics, currents, everything. You're basically building from scratch. So it's a long process. Chris, how long have we been working on this?
I'd say about a month or two.
At least I would say about 6 weeks. In all of my spare time, dinner breaks. I've not come in on the weekends, but so it's a lot of time, but it's worth it.
Is it?
It is.
That's always my question because you work so hard on these launches of these new graphic looks, and Aubrey's right. It can take weeks and weeks. So the question is, do you go down here to the local Walmart and ask somebody, "Hey, did you notice a change on the air tonight?" And they look at you like, "What change?"
Well, I think it's specifically for us. We went from some very, very rounded, almost cartoony kind of graphics to very square, sleek, fresh, modern. So I think because of the difference in the graphics that it's very noticeable. I mean, we launched it on our noon show today and I already had one comment before the show ended. So I think ours specifically, we do have that notice, but it's really cool because I mean it is a lot of work, but you get to I have a bit of a controlling personality, right, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So,
he went.
Yep. Right. So having like control over everything that we get to put out on air and tweaking things and having your say is really, really, really cool. So there's a lot of minuses, but there's a cool plus sides to it.
Yep, I hear you. So, Kevin, tell us about our guest. I just got a note from, I think, our guest that he just found the invite. So maybe we'll get him on here in a second.
Yeah, I've been trying to communicate with him. While we're waiting on him, I'll just comment that you've worked your voodoo yet again. We had the discussion last week about what were we talking about? The mobile home thing, right? And once again, you cause all the trouble, and then everyone gets mad at me. I have had all these people coming down on me this week. What's the matter with this? Do this, do that, do the other thing. And I'm like, look, I just showed up and did my accelerant bit for an hour and a half. Just leave me alone. But I have been harangued, and yet you're the one that caused all the trouble. So I don't know how you do that. One day I'm going to find out. And boy, the payback will be hell. That's all I'm here to say.
And that's a show title. Yeah, no, that I knew that you were just built for that show. You were born to be on that show last week. So,
well, I'm just trying to be fair, but people come and they're trying to get me to do things, and then they're trying to get to you through me, and I'm like, I am not James's keeper, which is another show title.
Yeah, that is a great show title. But no, go back and listen to last week's show or watch it. It was again one of these interesting shows that I'm still trying to process all that. But Art says, the guy that was on the show, he's going to be in St. Louis, and we should mention for those listening this week, the week of August 20th, that the National Weather Association annual meeting is about to begin in St. Louis, and it starts with the Weather Fest on Saturday, and then the broadcasters on Sunday, and then the sessions after that. So I think Art's going to be there. So
let me say just lock our. Anyone who's mad at James and is mad at Art, go to St. Louis on Friday or whatever this weekend, and they will both be there, and y'all can meet up and talk there. I have nothing to do with it.
Kevin at kevinselly.com. Please send all traffic over there. Right. Brian Peters is the internationally beloved meteorologist. Brian, what's it like being internationally beloved?
I have no idea. I'm curious to ask Aubrey, did the viewer comment positively or negatively about that?
Yeah, most of them were positive, and the one negative was actually a product of, as I was explaining earlier, the scene launch trigger being not pulled forward far enough. So, and that was kind of something we debated on the right color for the text because it was hard to see. So that was the only complaint. But now that I figured out that it was a preceding issue that I had to figure out, all is fixed, but all of the comments are, we like it. It looks really good. Yes,
good.
They've all been very positive, which is really what you want to hear when you've worked for so long and not eaten many dinners because of this.
Well, it's change, right? It doesn't matter if it's the weather graphics or the person or whatever, it's change. And people sometimes just don't like the change.
No, they don't. But I think this is such a drastic and good change that I think it's being more receptive.
What you've described, it sounds like it probably is.
Yeah.
So explain this issue again, Aubrey, the problem you were having. I'm not. So is it hand tracking? What was it working?
It's the scene launch trigger. So when you go and you hold the button and you're on the wall and you hit something and then it pops out at you. Well, the little in the graphic, what do they call it? The trigger wasn't pulled forward enough in the layers to where that trigger was basically masking the color. So it was looking like a pale light blue. And then when I figured it out, I was messing with it and I pulled it forward and realized that it was like a very nice dark blue gradient behind it. It was completely hidden. So it gave the 7-day a whole new look. And I noticed it with a couple of the other graphics too. So the headlines and stuff like that. So it was just it was kind of in the wrong position. So I don't know if it was just a product of building the graphic or maybe it was a downloading issue. Could be when we uploaded things that something moved positions. I don't know, but it's fixed.
So Brian, should I say this? This is embarrassing. I have no idea what she's talking about. Does Zoe have the same box that she does? I mean, it's like, in my old age, I used to know everything about these things. And now I am so stinking busy doing all these digital products and services and the school talks. And you come in here and you have to have kind of like specialists on the weather staff to manage this thing. And I am not the specialist on our staff to manage that box.
Neither am I.
I've learned,
we're the happy idiots.
I mean, I didn't know anything about this stuff, and I've just kind of learned over time and I'm kind of one of those people. I like to go in and mess around with stuff and figure things out and just click a bunch of stuff and kind of see what's in there. And it's just years of doing that with the old Mac system and figuring it out. So I am no expert. This does not come natural by any means. It's just kind of a product of figuring it out for 6, 7, 8 years.
Rick, aren't you glad you don't deal with television graphic systems?
Right. It's just amazing, and this just goes into the stack of things that they don't teach you in school. You don't know you're going to have to do all this, and it's kind of a lot of on-the-job learning. And I just, people look at TV meteorology like, oh, what a glamorous life. You pop in at 3:30 and the makeup artist do their thing, and then you're on the air. But man, it's a lot of hard work. I don't know how you guys do it.
And there's even these WSI, groups. We've got one for our company for graphics on Facebook and one for WSI. And some of the stuff that some of these guys put in, I'm just like, it just way over my head. And I'm just like, do you understand any of this? Like they can do some amazing stuff. People like Brad Panovich and Ricky Matthews. These guys who really understand the technical side, they just do incredible things. And what we did learn was that WSI is not going to be at NWA, which is quite unfortunate because I really learned a lot when I went to Norfolk in those training sessions. And I know a lot of people are very disappointed and kind of voiced to them like, hey, we want you to know that we really enjoyed these. These were super helpful training sessions. So hopefully they'll think about it next year and end up going.
Yeah. I agree. I would love to see them at NWA, but I think for so many of us, it boils down to time.
Yeah.
Everybody on this show, everybody listening to this show, I don't care who you are, we have 24 hours in a day. You cannot generate another microsecond. You can't do it. And how you spend that, kind of determines your career success and everything else. And you have to decide, are you going to work on graphics all day? Are you going to go to school visits? Or are you going to work on social media? What are you going to do? So it's a hard decision. But Kevin, bring our guest in. Look who showed up here.
Hey, he showed up. David, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic. We are really excited on multiple levels. The first is that you're here because you're joining us from Japan. Is that right?
Ooh.
Yeah, over in Kyoto, Japan.
And you've been there a couple of days with your wife. And you told me the other day when we did our test, you were going to go out and do some sightseeing. What have you seen so far?
I went and saw the Fushimi Inari Shrine, which is a pretty interesting little hike you can do in Kyoto. It's one of the biggest shrines in Kyoto. You walk through these torii gates. It's like these big the big gates that are maybe 10 feet tall that are bright orange. And they go all the way up the mountainside.
Oh.
And lead to various temples and shrines. So it's kind of a lot of ancient history in Kyoto. So it's a pretty beautiful place to explore a lot of the mountainside and kind of see a lot of the temples and things that were built, many centuries ago. And
I'll bet you guys have a wonderful adventure ahead, and we'll find out more about that maybe in a couple of minutes. I don't back up a little bit, but you and I met because you were nice enough to host myself and a photographer when we came up in April, or even before that. But this spring, because we were doing severe weather week coverage and talked about radar, and you are one of the guys who is charting the future course of radar. I'm going to make everybody on the panel jealous because I have actually got to lay hands first the prototype, the about to be operational phased array radar. And is it still in your workshop or is it on the roof yet?
We have 2 or 3 different prototype systems that are kind of the next generation design that are one of them is operational. It's sitting out on the side of our laboratory between the National Weather Center and the radar building. You probably see it from the Weather Center. It's just a big cylinder that sits kind of in a fenced-in area around the building. Mm-hmm. But
are you pointing it at Rick and shooting all that radiation over onto his area?
Yeah, one of the nice things about phased array radars is you can point it in any direction you like, so you can be very focused with your energy. And
all right, well, we've been talking about phased array for years and years and years, and the longer we talked this spring, the more depressed I got because we have kept saying to ourselves, "Oh, it's just around the corner. It's just around the corner." But 2 questions. First of all, tell anybody who doesn't know a basic explanation of what is the phased array radar.
So I'll start with basically a general radar system that we have now that's just a parabolic dish, the big dish radars that you see, be it a NexRad radar or the mobile radars. So all of the energy that the radar transmits for those goes into the dish, and out in one direction that's determined where that dish is pointing. So you mechanically move that dish around in different locations, and that's where you're collecting your data. With the phased array radar, you don't even have to move the radar, the face of the radar antenna at all. So instead of just having one area where the energy is coming in and going out, the phased array radar has thousands of small antennas on its face. So one of the most common designs you'll see is basically a big flat square panel, and it may have 50 antennas in one direction and 50 in the other. So you may have thousands of antenna elements that are both transmitting and receiving energy. So the reason why that's important is it gives you a lot of control. So with each of those, you can time when you send out a signal and when you receive it. So by timing them in different ways, you can point in different directions. So one way I like to think about that in terms of how you can change the beam pointing direction by timing is if you had a row of runners who were all lined up, and you told the person on the end to start running, and then the next person next to them tell them to start running, and sequentially went down the row, you would get the people who are on the right side would be out in front of the people on the left. So you get sort of a positively sloped line, so to speak, where it's kind of going or closer to the radar on the left side, farther away on the right side. So it'd be kind of pointing off in the opposite direction or toward the left of the radar.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So the phased array radar works in a similar manner by delaying each of those elements so you can point in different directions at different times. So you can delay one side compared to the other, and that changes basically the alignment of the wave that goes out in that manner. So you can send a wave out to the right side, left side, and so on.
And there's going to be 100 different benefits at its base level. As a broadcaster, I sit here and I wait for the next radar image to come in. And back in the day, it was 6 minutes in between new pictures, and that got sped up a little bit. And now we go into sales mode, which maybe we get a picture every 2 minutes. But what are we going to get as far as speed improvements on the phased array?
See, the goal of the phased array is to be able to obtain the three-dimensional volume of data everywhere in 60 seconds or less.
That's fantastic.
So getting rapid scan data. But not only that, if you want to say, one of the nice things about a phased array radar is instead of mechanically rotating a dish around, you can scan in a non-continuous manner. So you could be focusing more on, say, a developing mesocyclone tornado in different locations and keep revisiting that so you could get even faster scanning in that area, or sample a column of data from the ground up so you can see all the processes going on in that storm. And and you end up sacrificing some temporal resolution in the clear air, where maybe you can only scan every 90 seconds, but you would really hone in on that area where the tornado is developing to be able to scan as fast as possible and get as much information as you can in that area where it's really critical to have an idea of, how is, in a column sense, how is the rotation evolving? How is the storm evolving?
Mm-hmm. And one of the sacrifices, and correct me if I'm wrong, in sales mode is that we're losing the mid or higher level information, and that will not be the case in phased array?
So yeah, with phased array radar, we could look at 1 degree elevation and then switch all of a sudden to 20 degrees. With sales, we have to come back to 1 degree. So we're taking time out to come back down to the lowest elevation, then go back up. The phased array, that all happens instantaneously. So you could be completely flexible on how you scan the storm. And if there's, especially for cases where the mid-levels are really important, you could prioritize scanning there. But you could do an entire volume scan of the atmosphere in 60 seconds or less, including the mid-levels of the storm, the upper parts of the storm, and the low levels, to where you don't have to make that sacrifice that we do in sales mode to obtain the low-level observations.
And one of the mechanical benefits is we're not spinning a big, giant, heavy dish on a small gear, essentially. In fact, one of Rick's radars failed, in the last couple of weeks, the bull gear, I think is what it's called. But this is not mechanical, right? It's just going to sit there.
Yeah, the most likely candidate design is what we call a four-faced phased array. So that would be basically picturing a square. There'd be a phased array on each of the faces of the square. So each of those would be responsible for looking in a 90-degree sector. So you'd complete that with the 4 to get a 360-degree view of the atmosphere.
So you said, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So you'd be able to cover everything without having to rotate the antenna, and you would just you would electronically change the beam pointing direction within that 90-degree sector. Now, the cheaper version would be something where if you just did one face or two face phased array and then you rotated it in azimuth, you wouldn't have to rotate, or you wouldn't have to change elevation angles like we do, but that would add mechanical parts, so it probably would be a less attractive solution.
So you said one of the candidates, and then you talked about the square. Now, the one that I saw and got to touch in the shop is a cylinder. It's round. What explain the difference between those two, and how many candidates are there?
So there's kind of the two of the kind of core designs are the square design, which is what we call a planar phased array. So it's basically like a plane, square faced. And then the cylindrical one, there are some specific advantages to that with respect to dual polarization radar measurements. So one of the probably biggest challenges to phased array radar is our ability to make dual polarization measurements accurately. And with the planar phased array radar, if you look off, if you're pointing straight perpendicularly, if you're transmitting a horizontal and a vertical wave, as we do with the dual polarization radar, there's no issue. But if you say you want to look 20 degrees off the face of the antenna or 30 degrees off, you get a really large bias in your measurements of differential reflectivity or any of the other polarimetric measurements that you're trying to make. And those biases way exceed the values that are tolerable for useful polarimetric radar measurements. So there's two options. One is coming up with a way to correct the measurements on the planar face. The other one is with the cylinder, you can always be pointing basically off perpendicular to the face of the cylinder. So you can group the antennas so you're always just going around, or you're always pointing off. So you could take elements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you could take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And you're always going to have an electric field that's horizontal and vertical, where there's no bias at all in your polarimetric measurement at least from your antenna.
So you have more than one, certainly one or more, many more theories on each of these candidates, but I'm guessing that a lot of these things you can't answer until you get a practical working prototype, correct?
Yeah, I believe they've collected some data with the cylindrical phased array radar. I haven't had much experience with that system, but I do believe they have verified at least the polarimetric bias or this independence of scanning angle, that you don't have that issue. But it's a 4 or 5 degree beam width S-band radar, so there's a lot of issues with a really coarse resolution phased array radar that also introduced problems for testing. So that's been one of the challenges with that system.
So I kind of teased this question, and then I'm going to ask it, and then I'm going to have to go and do my Fox show. So you guys pick up the chase and find out what he's doing in Japan too, because I don't fully know that. But I teased. We've been talking about this on the show for a long time. But everything that you told me this spring and what you're saying now suggests that we're not going to get this thing next month. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't think there's a beautiful operational prototype that's ready for manufacturing to stick on 150 future radar sites across the country. So it's certainly the combination of dual polarization and phased array radar technology is one of the big challenges that we have for meeting some of the various deadlines for especially for the joining like the sensor project, which is trying to take advantage of some of the spectrum allocation funds. So if we are able to free up some of the spectrum that the FCC controls, then we're able to potentially get some money to fund the phased array project. But that has a pretty short fuse deadline in terms of being able to get that money, whereas all the other agencies like the FAA they need to replace their systems pretty soon. So there's various challenges in being able to time this all out so that getting dual pole or mature dual pole and phased array radar system at the same time is certainly going to be a challenge, but it's something a lot of people are working really hard toward, and hopefully we can come up with a solution.
So let me ask you questions here, David. Is this thing X-band? Tell us about the RF end of this thing. How does it work?
So the cylindrical phased array radar is an S-band prototype system. So the goal is to mimic as closely as possible what you would have with an operational radar. The main sacrifice is the beam width. It is 4 or 5 degrees, so it's relatively coarse resolution. But we do have other phased array radars that we operate at OU. One's a mobile radar that's at X-band, and it's on the back of a truck, and we can take it out, scan really quickly, thunderstorms. So from a more scientific perspective, we can learn, what can we get from rapid scan radar data, especially with really fine resolution, and then maybe kind of degrade that in terms of spatial resolution to figure out what we might see from, say, an X-rad radar.
So my question to my friend Rick, have you gotten your hands on this data, and what are your thoughts if so?
Well, we haven't seen this data, I don't think, from the radar that David's talking about. We have had access to the other phased array radar, and David, that's what I was going to ask, is about the radar up on North Base. One phased array radar that was there has been replaced by another one. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. We have been able to look at that, and so I'd be interested to hear your, kind of differentiate between what you're talking about and if you've driven through Norman, Aubrey, you've been there, and if you look over on the west side of the interstate, you see or east side of the interstate, you see a blue dome out there. There's a phased array out there too. So, David, what's the difference?
So the new phased array radar that's out on the north side of Norman is a planar phased array radar, or planar face. So it will have the bias that we talked about. If you look off in azimuth from the face of the antenna, you will get a bias in the polarimetric radar measurements. But there are correction techniques to try and address that. So that's one of the key research questions that researchers at NSSL and OU will be working on, trying to address that. But the prototype that's up there is 1 degree beam width. So I'd say it's a much more mature prototype than the radar system at the radar building at OU, where we're really in kind of the early prototyping stage rather than kind of the mature deployment where forecasters could do evaluation of the data. It's really, the system up there has been, many years of research kind of coming to fruition to where there's an operational prototype, a polarimetric phased array radar that can be evaluated by the scientific community. So it's kind of evaluating these different candidates, but they're all kind of at different stages too of sort of the maturity of the system and research that's been done.
So that one's kind of a hybrid, correct me if I'm wrong, but that one's kind of a hybrid where it has one planar face or one panel, but it still rotates on a mechanical, it still rotates, right? So it's kind of a hybrid between the current radar technology and the future. I
believe so, yeah. And that's, so one advantage of rotating mechanically is if you want to completely alleviate the problem of steering off in azimuth, you could just slowly rotate in azimuth to where you don't have to deal with that bias, but you could scan electronically up and down, which speeds up things a lot too. So there's definitely a benefit to that. And, for giving data to a forecaster saying, in 10, 20 years, this is the type of data you might have after, we still have some issues we have to address, but I'm sure you would much rather see, the best data possible rather than something with really large errors that becomes difficult to use.
Yeah, that's good to have. Yeah, but our office is kind of used to experimenting or testing with things. I know one of the things that I felt looking at it is we talked about how much more data you're going to get and how rapidly you're going to get it. How are we going to process all that in our heads? Sometimes we're getting and when we're in sales 3 and we're getting a new low-level image every 60 to 75 seconds, sometimes that seems, but that's, there's not an answer to that question probably, but that's one of the things I think is going to change the way we have to do business. And we're going to have to really think about interfaces or, how forecasters are going to look at that data, ingest it, process it, and then use it.
Yeah, there's sort of, I guess, three things that I could see with respect to that. Certainly, in the visualization aspect, there are probably ways that you can visualize really rapid scan radar data. So let's say things like rotational intensity, like the rotational, I forget the name of the product, but you can look at rotational intensity at the low levels. But you could also, with the phased array radar, you could very easily look at it as a column and see how the rotational intensity is changing at all the heights in time and make a product where you could look at that. So there may be some ways to display the data that kind of condense what you're looking at. And then also algorithm development wise, there may be signatures that can be detected, by kind of using some deep learning techniques and going through all the data and exploring, if we analyze the data or if you run some algorithm, you see tornadic and non-tornadic signatures that can be automatically detected or pointed out to a forecaster. Those might be some ways too that could be very beneficial to help with kind of the data overload problem. But I imagine you could always degrade the resolution of the data too if you had to.
So let's ask a nosy personal question, David. Why in the world are you in Japan?
So I'm doing. I came here actually in 2012 to work with a professor here on tornado research. So I've come back to work with him again. The first time I was doing research on tornado debris. So the professor here has a wind tunnel where he makes measurements of different pieces of debris and how they fly in strong winds. So this is something that was really of interest to me when I was doing tornado debris signature research during my PhD, was exploring how debris get lofted in tornadoes and what types of signatures that they produce. So we spent a lot of time working on that over the last few years. And coming back now, I'm actually doing a pretty different project. We're modeling the impact of terrain and buildings on the flow of the tornado. So seeing how the winds in the tornadoes change in response to having buildings or terrain.
I'll be honest with you, I had no idea they did tornado research, or at least a lot of it in Japan. That is very interesting. I had no earthly idea. They don't get that many over there, do they?
You get a fair number of tornadoes, but they tend to be on the weak side of the EF scale. So a lot of weak tornadoes, occasionally a strong tornado, maybe even some tropical cyclone tornadoes, which might actually get a few of those here in a couple days.
Awesome. So how long will you be there?
I will be here for 2 months, so coming back in mid-October.
Wow. So let's go back to the current radar technology. I would assume you're involved in the dual polarization upgrade and the research leading into it. Did you expect the correlation coefficient product to be so effective in the early phases of this? Because I don't think many of us did.
That's really useful for distinguishing between different hydrometeor types and also between precipitation and non-precipitation echoes. And that really is a valuable thing to be able to distinguish that. There are still some issues with correlation coefficient. Like if you have really strong precipitation gradients, you'll get kind of a big long streak of lower HV that's just an artifact. But in general, if you're being able to identify a tornado, it really is very helpful for seeing how high the debris can be lofted within the tornado, how quickly it's being lofted, and a lot of the characteristics that you can learn from the dual polarization data. But also feeding that into various algorithms that detect hail, and maybe even some potential in the future for hail sizing, for example.
What's the greatest altitude that you've seen tornado debris being lofted, displayed by dual polarization radar?
There are several cases where you see it all the way as high as we were scanning, so near the anvil level in some cases.
So that's 30, 40,000 feet?
Yeah, and particularly in the really intense tornadoes that are lofting a lot of debris. I did a lot of my dissertation work on some of the 2010, 2011 tornado outbreaks in Oklahoma. And in those cases, especially the El Reno tornado of 2011, we were able to observe debris basically up to the top of the storm. And it probably isn't doesn't come too much as a surprise because we do see evidence of these long distance debris transport where debris get transported from the storm hundreds of kilometers or hundreds of miles downstream in some cases. So the debris are getting up to the jet stream altitude where they're being ejected way downstream. And actually the best case of this that I've seen with radar observations, if you go back and look at the NextRad data from the Moore, Oklahoma 2013 tornado, you can see debris falling out all the way to Tulsa in the NextRad data. It's a big plume of low correlation coefficient going all the way out there.
Wow.
And for those that don't know, what type of debris would be lofted to that altitude from below?
Now, these are relatively small particles or relatively small lightweight objects, so like pieces of paper. A lot of times people report, finding photos and relatively lightweight things like that, or insulation's another really lightweight object that may not go that distance, but leaves, really things that are would fall really slowly if you kind of just drop them. They kind of settle down very slowly to the surface. So not like a large 2x4 or things that you see in tornado videos. Those tend to fall out within the last few hundred meters or so.
But and I don't know how long you've been doing this, David, but where we are with phased array, at some point we were there with dual polarization radar.
Mm-hmm.
What were the expectations of dual pol coming in from a research standpoint? What were you thinking the operational guys would get out of it? Has it lived up to your expectations, the dual polarization products?
I think a lot of that actually predates when I was in the meteorological.
Okay, you're too young. You're too young. You kids.
But from what I've looked at in terms of the past literature on dual polarization data, it was it took 10, 20 years of really detailed research and operational test beds, especially in the 1990s, 2000s. A lot of the research that was being done at OU and the National Severe Storms Lab to test the dual polarization prototype system. They were looking at the applications for flash flooding, for severe storms, tornadoes, hail, damaging winds, all these different things, and exploring all the benefits of, and also the drawbacks of, are there any disadvantages to including that? One of them with the current network is that you lose 3 dB or half the power because you're splitting it into the horizontal and vertical channels. So you lose a little bit of sensitivity, so your measurements are kind of a little bit noisier than they would be otherwise. But the benefits, certainly speak for themselves, I think, in terms of the rainfall products, the severe weather capabilities, especially for tornadoes. There's a lot of added value. I'm sure Rick can speak more to this in terms of how forecasters using dual polarization data. One of the big questions for phased array radar is, let's say, and we have some deadline that's mandated by maybe the FAA trying to join on and team up with NOAA to build a next generation phased array radar network. Let's say if they have to have their radar adopted in 5 years, and we can't build a dual polarization phased array radar, what are we going to do? Do we just abandon dual pol and go with phased array, or do we keep a dual pol system and kind of hop on, or do we kind of do our own thing and just build a dual polarization dish radar like we have now, maybe with some additional upgrades? Now, that's a question that might have to be answered if we aren't able to merge these two technologies together in a timely enough manner. So I'm not really sure the answer to that.
I know Kevin's asked you about the timing. The question I think a lot of us have, well, these old radars, and listen, these are WSR 88Ds. That's 1988. Will they hang on until we get phased array going? And I know that there's been a program to come in and modernize these radars. I think that is that complete now, or how far are they with that in terms of the mechanics? Getting the mechanical parts redone.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the details of that operational rebuild. Rick might be able to better answer that.
Yeah, I bet you Rick knows.
Yeah, there's a multi-phase process where they're going around and they're doing things in phases. They're doing the pedestal, they're doing the I don't know all the different parts and pieces but I think there's 4 or 5 different phases, and I think they've completed the first and maybe working on the second. I'll have to check. It's there. The plan is all online. I think you can even find, the schedule for the radars that are coming up and things like that. But yeah, it's essentially like having a 1988 car that you got brand new, and you've been driving it full speed and grinding the gears and putting it in reverse and going from 0 to 60 and stopping and starting and backing up since 1988 nonstop. So it's well, they can't go on forever, and hopefully this program to refurbish and update some of the mechanics and update some of the components will make them last a little bit longer, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's the object of the game, is to somehow get the mechanics kind of refurbished and get better, newer stuff in there so they'll last longer, so we can make it until phased array comes online. And I know Kevin asked you this, David, but I'll ask you again. Timing. I'll probably be dead. Me and Brian will be out at the cemetery by the time phased array goes online. But what are we talking? 10 years, you think? How many more years here?
I think 10 to 15 years is probably the earliest we would see it happen. If just given the technology, unless we were to just completely abandon dual polarization and just run with a single polarization phased array radar, that probably could be done in a shorter period of time. But I think the research really over the next 5 years will kind of dictate that timeline. If we're able to come up with a solution to where we can make good dual polarization measurements, and we can do it everywhere, where we're not only able to just make good dual polarization measurements, we're looking straight in front of us, but we can do it off to the sides. We can address that problem as well as some other technical challenges. Then the 2030 to 2035 timeframe probably it can be done. But if it goes much beyond that, then it really kind of starts kicking the can down the road, and that overlap of how long we can keep the next radars, kind of live and kicking, really becomes much more questionable, I'm sure, after 2030.
So David, let's go back to the beginning here. What got you into this? Most of us have a story about a storm, a hurricane, some event in our childhood got us into meteorology. What's your story?
So I was originally scared of tornadoes and severe weather as a kid, and that kind of transitioned into a strong interest. So this is probably around when I was 4 or 5. I was kind of anxious about severe weather when there's a tornado watch, but I was also really curious about numbers and really interested in math. So one of the things I was drawn to was the weather page of the newspaper. So I'd look at the weather page every day. It's really interested in kind of the changing weather patterns, and all these things kind of evolved into a strong interest in meteorology. I also had a grandfather who was a broadcaster in the Kansas City area, so there's a little bit of interest in that growing up too. The possibility of doing something related to broadcast meteorology was held some interest, but really the kind of the pure science and understanding tornadoes. I grew up watching a lot of tornado videos, and was really excited, seeing some of the first live Doppler radar data when it was debuting in the Kansas City markets. I thought that was really cool to be able to see a live radar image of a storm and see where it was going. So
the question is, I was going to say, did you grow up in Kansas City or somewhere close to there?
Yeah, in Kansas City area.
Okay, so in high school, you decided you're doing meteorology. You went to where? OU?
Yeah, University of Oklahoma. So I took a little bit of a odd track through college because I spent my first year at Kansas State University. I was actually a business major with some idea combining business and meteorology down the road, but I pretty quickly switched courses from that to focusing purely on meteorology, and then from there, bachelor's, master's, PhD, all at OU.
What drew you into the research radar side of this instead of the operational side?
I'd always had kind of a curiosity at how tornadoes form, and Also just the radar signatures of storms and understanding more about, what is their significance, and what changes do you see in the signatures as severe weather's happening, and sort of the benefit of that is, it helps people, or makes it possible to better forecast tornadoes and severe weather events. So being able, the kind of the combined interest in radar as well as severe weather and the curiosity of, understanding more about thunderstorms and especially severe weather, supercells, tornadoes is really the driving factor for me. And being able to, at OU during my master's and PhD, being able to take the mobile radars out and be able to see firsthand, here's the storm we're studying, we're scanning it, being able to see the data from the storm is really cool experience to kind of be able to take all those things in and then take the data back and analyze that, study the processes that are happening within the storm to learn more about, why did the tornado form in that case, or how did it dissipate, is really something I was really interested in doing in graduate school.
To talk about the Doppler on Wheels program, I assume you still go out with that. When are you deployed, and how many people go with it, and how does the whole process work?
So right now I'm lead field experiments with our mobile radar we call the atmospheric imaging radar. It's a mobile radar truck that we take out about 10 to 15, I'd say about 10 times per year. So we'll pick days where it looks like severe weather is likely within a day's drive of Norman. So we'll go to southern Kansas, Texas, most of Oklahoma, and take the radar out to try and scan supercells and tornadoes, or other occasional we'll go out and scan an MCS or squall line events too. And so we try to, the radar is pretty interesting because it transmits a really wide beam. So we're able to scan everything from the ground up to about mid-levels of the storm all in one shot. So it works kind of like a phased array radar, but we're able to collect data over that wide area and then process it so we can look at in fine detail all the way up in a column. So we tend to stay back a little bit further than you might with some of the other mobile radars, so we can get more of the storm structure, but be able to see everything simultaneously from the ground all the way up.
And how many people are out on a trip? 1, 2, 3? How many folks go with it?
So we have room for 3 people on our truck. We have a driver, navigator, who's that's usually the lead scientist. So that's usually my role with these experiments. So also have a radar operator who's getting the radar set up. So while we're driving down the road, getting ready to set up and scan, we're turning on the radar, getting everything ready to go. So hopefully when we set down, there's this nice wall cloud that's beginning to organize, and everything's going perfectly. We're ready to start scanning and collect data.
And how many times does that happen, David?
About once every couple of years. Maybe not that often, but it's certainly in the setup and the tornadoes forming. Usually if they go through a few cycles of rotation intensifies, and then nothing really happens, and then kind of all gets going. And sometimes you're setting up when the tornado's happening, or sometimes you give up and go after the storm next to it, and try not to do that too often because you find yourself bouncing around storms, which eats up a lot of time too. But
Joe Q Public, they think every time you go out, there's always a wall cloud, always a tornado. You're in the perfect place. They have no idea how many times you go out and nothing happens, or you're on the wrong storm. This is hard. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. This is not easy.
Well, it's one of our big research questions is, given storm A, B, and C, why did storm B produce a tornado and storm A didn't? You look at the environmental parameters, and a lot of times they're really similar. It's really hard to often distinguish between those storms and determine, which storm is going to produce a tornado, which one's not. And that's one of the big science questions we're trying to answer with this data is, can we get some insight into why the storm produced a tornado, why it didn't? And the rapid scan data is one of the avenues we might be able to explore to see, are there some processes in the storm that are different in these storms that produce tornadoes and those that don't?
So let me ask you a question now, Dave. So you're a smart guy. What are we going to do to get real-time monitoring of the upper air? We're still launching weather balloons twice a day. Where is this going to go? You know, getting real-time data from the surface to the tropopause. How is this going to happen? Is it going to be radar technology or something else? It's got to be something else because radar can only do so much.
Yeah, in terms of clear air, there's not a whole lot radar can offer in that direction. Satellite's certainly a big component where you can look at the kind of the emission of radiation in different layers of the atmosphere and try and reconstruct temperature, humidity profiles. There's a lot of issues like clouds. Those techniques don't work where you have clouds. So, well, that's a big part of the atmosphere. So there's issues with things like that. And there's also some remote sensing techniques, some that use more like optical sensors like LiDARs, or basically where you're pointing up some sort of laser into the atmosphere that's invisible, of course, to us. But from those, you can get some information about the temperature and wind structure of the atmosphere, but only in a column looking up. But they could monitor continuously as opposed to launching balloons every 12 hours. So those are some of in terms of getting data in 3D space, there really isn't too much in terms of ground-based remote sensing that we're able to do to get kind of a three-dimensional picture of what the temperature structure, the humidity fields look like. There's really kind of a breakthrough waiting to happen if somebody could come up with something, but really not aware of anything, at least right now, that other than satellite data that can kind of provide, say, a sounding at any given point that you can pick out, and those even have pretty significant limitations.
See, Brian, there's no hope. I knew it. There's no hope. I mean,
there's always hope, but good gosh, yeah,
not in our generation.
Well, and that's isn't that one of the reasons, James, that the radiosondes are still, because they're the best for doing what we're trying to do at the moment. But
they are. Sure, I mean, here we're launching balloons like they launched in 1945. Mm-hmm. We just haven't figured out a better way. And at some point, I have faith in David's generation that they're going to get this nailed before he retires, because that to me is the biggest limiting factor in so much of what we can do in terms of improving practitioners' work where we are down here on this level. And I was going to ask David, how do you see the relationship between researchers and the practitioners? Do you think we're communicating well, the information that you're gathering and the knowledge that you're collecting? Do you think that's filtering down to us very well?
Well, I hope so, but I think in general it does eventually have, through various committee meeting or through like the AMS annual meetings and the NWA, a lot of this research that's done on dual polarization or phased array radar. I hope that those are avenues where we can kind of get feedback from various practitioners, on the broadcast side, also the operational forecasters, private sector community, see how they use these different sources of data and the research that's being done. Is that it's certainly our end goal is to learn as much as we can from kind of a scientific curiosity point of view, but also be able to take that and then see what kind of applications can we use that to forecast better and provide the ability to, say, distinguish tornadoes and tornadic storms and non-tornadic storms, or be able to identify large hail or small hail, things like that really are kind of the end goals of, we're all kind of working towards that goal and disseminating that information to the public and improving public safety. So I feel like it's something that, all researchers can try and do better, is work with the kind of the end users and the practitioners to really try and incorporate that into their research goals and see, given this research, is it useful to the operational community, to the broadcast meteorologists, private sector.
And so now you're in Japan, and I was going to ask, what time is it? It's 9:26 p.m. where I am. What time is it where you are in Japan, David?
It is 11:26 a.m. So I think we are 14 hours ahead. Tuesday, 11:26 a.m.
Okay, cool.
Guys, we're talking to the future.
Yeah. It's tomorrow here. Yeah.
It's Tomorrowland, ladies and gentlemen. Now you don't you have maybe a tropical system that might get in there, you say?
Yeah, we do. On Thursday, I was looking at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center's forecast. the typhoon, and it basically comes right up by Kyoto. We're kind of on the east side of it, or the center of circulation is supposed to go on to the west of us. So it should be pretty interesting. Looks like we're in the forecast area, at least for tropical cyclone strength or tropical storm strength winds, maybe hurricane strength winds.
Wow,
certainly possible.
That's exciting. That's exciting stuff. So what is the radar technology they have that is operational in that country now?
So instead of like an operational S-band radar network like we have, they have a mix of it's mostly C-band radars. So they're covering a much smaller area. It's an island where you have a lot more mountains. So you don't tend to look out as far as we do in the US, where you have places like Kansas, Oklahoma, where you don't really have any terrain blockage issues. So they also can cover or put more radars in a dense space, since the total square mileage of Japan compared to the US is much smaller. But it's just a mechanically rotating dish. Some of them are dual polarization. It's a mix of Doppler radars that are polarimetric and some that are not dual pol. They
I was
are
going to ask,
actually,
is it like a WSR 57, or it is more modern, I guess, then?
I think it's it is a more modern technology. So they do have dual polarization. So I don't think it's as high quality data as the NextRad radars, but it's probably one of the better national radar networks in the United States. And they are actually doing some experiments with phased array radar research to try and build an operational dual pol phased array radar system in Japan. I've seen some presentations it's actually the folks at Toshiba do radar research in addition to all their other things that they do, but they're building a dual pol phased array radar that they're hoping to have collected some test data, and I don't know, maybe they'll get some cool typhoon data to maybe see if there's some applications of that.
I've always wondered about China. It's like a big mystery. Is there any communication at all with China from our scientists to theirs in terms of meteorology and radar technology? Do we know anything about what they do over there?
I'm not too familiar with their radar technology. I know I've seen a few papers in the AMS literature from the Chinese radar that have been published with Chinese radar systems. And I think some of those were dual pol, so they must have dual polarization radars, at least in some locations.
David, do some of those researchers, I'm sorry, some of those researchers that you're Kevin. Working with there, do they come here to Norman to look under the hood and see what's going on here?
We have had a few visitors. So we have an exchange right now, a research exchange set up between Kyoto University and the University of Oklahoma. So every 2 years, the scientists from each country go and visit the other side. So last year, we had all the folks from OU came over to Kyoto University, and we had a 2-week symposium on radar technology, numerical weather prediction, all different types of research to learn about the research they're doing here, as well as in the University of Oklahoma. And then next year, we'll have the same symposium in Oklahoma, where they'll all come down, so tour the National Weather Center, the radar building, and see a lot of the technology that we have here, as well as see talks on the research that's being done.
And so where are you working? Is there an equivalent to the National Weather Center in Japan? And is there an equivalent to the Advanced Radar Research Lab that I assume there's that you work in here?
Yeah, there's a Meteorological Research Institute, and that's near Tokyo. So that's sort of their equivalent of the National Weather Center. So they have that's basically their National Research Center for atmospheric research science, or for weather research. And the Japan Meteorological the Japan Meteorological Agency is the equivalent of the National Weather Service. So they do the operational weather forecast for typhoons, severe weather, and they're also housed in near Tokyo. Here I'm housed at the Kyoto University, so it's working at like University of Oklahoma, Colorado State, Penn State, working at like a university research center where they have a strong atmospheric science program, and they have a lot of they do have some radar systems. They're not phased array, but they do have radar systems that they use for studies here. They actually have a giant radar that's located up in the mountains. It's made out of what basically look like giant TV antennas. They call Yagi antennas. And it's about 100 yards wide, or the whole radar is. And they use it to scan the upper part of the atmosphere to study turbulence and like the mesosphere and the thermosphere, and really looking up high in the atmosphere.
Are there, what other countries are we sharing this type of data and research with other than Japan?
So there's a lot of exchange in terms of radar research, especially dual polarization radar with Canada and the European countries. So there's been quite a bit of exchange, especially in Europe, on operational rainfall estimation. And there's been an increase in the severe weather research also in dual polarization signatures in Europe. There are a decent number, there's quite a bit of severe weather in Europe as well. So there's quite a bit of interest, but I don't think they've quite transitioned to the phased array realm yet.
Now, this isn't going to work for the podcast, the audio listeners. Poor Rick is shaking his head, but I want to know, I asked about, a facility like the National Weather Center in Japan, but I'm showing a picture. Do they have anything like this? Can you see the thumbnails there, David? You see, yeah, there's the merchandise store at the National Weather Center. And oh, you're a little muffled, Rick. Try again. Explain what we're seeing here.
They do have umbrellas in Japan, I believe.
Yes.
For those who are listening, Rick is in the merchandise. There's a store at the National Weather Center on their website, and you can get logo things. I have hats and shirts and all those kind of things. But there's a wonderful picture of Rick holding a National Weather Center umbrella sitting on a lovely park bench somewhere, I assume outside the Weather Center. And I found this some weeks ago, and Rick said he was a little miffed because he didn't even get to keep the umbrella, and there's no royalties for that picture, right?
Right.
You got muffled again. We didn't hear you.
No royalties.
So one day, David, we'll see pictures around Japan of you holding a Japanese Weather Service umbrella, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, I'll see if I go up to visit the Japan Meteorological Agency, I'll see. Actually, Kyoto University probably has umbrellas, so I'll see if the gift shop has some, see if I can find a good park bench to take a photo.
That's perfect. Well, so you'll have some downtime, I assume. What are you going to do? What else are you going to do in Japan with your wife?
One of the things that I wasn't able to do last time because there was a typhoon that came over was visit Okinawa. It's a small Japanese island on the south side of Japan, but it's a tropical island, kind of like Japanese Hawaii. So kind of looking forward to trying to go there in mid-September, and hopefully there won't be a typhoon.
What does your wife do? Is she interested in this, or is she shopping or something else that you're doing while you're doing your thing?
She's just relaxing. She finished a medical residency a couple months ago. So she had 3 years of kind of an intensive, work 60 to 80 hours a week training in the hospital. So she's taking some time off between that and kind of starting a real job, or starting her, first full-time physician job. So trying to take some time off between that to relax.
So if you could wave your magic wand and budget weren't an issue, and this will be the last question, what is it that you want or need at the radar laboratory there?
So like technology that I could just sort of
anything. Santa's going to put your favorite, the thing you need most under the tree. It's a giant phased array radar or something. What do you need?
I would like a phased array radar that has 2 frequencies. So it would transmit at S-band and transmit at a very short wavelength, like a K-band. And the advantage to that is you can look at 2 very different things with that. At S-band, you can see precipitation very well, hail, and distinguish all the precipitation types, but it's more difficult to see things in clouds. So if you had a radar that is at that shorter wavelength, you're able to see clouds really well. So you'd be able to get a really complete picture of the atmosphere by having. So that's more of a research, sort of a research dream system, but I think it would be a really useful thing to have.
Is there any conceptual thinking on how to deal with the curvature of the Earth problem?
The main way that's been tried to tackle is basically put a lot of radars out that are relatively expensive. So that was the idea behind the CASA project. To basically create small networks of relatively low-cost radars that would be able to kind of, where you could put them maybe 20, 30 miles apart from each other, to where you're never really, even at low altitudes, you're always scanning within the lowest few hundred meters of the ground. So that really gives you a lot of low-level sampling to where you're always trying to look at the tornado level of the tornado rather than just the mesocyclone.
Very good. Well, this has been fascinating. I'm sorry I had to go away in the middle. I can't wait to hear what you guys talked about while I was away. I see a ton of books behind you. Did you bring all of those, or are they in Japanese?
No, those are all. I'm basically in a kind of like the laboratory's library, sort of like the guest, the facility for the guest researchers. So.
Are they all written in Japanese? Obviously, it's a lot of math. But...
most of them are written in Japanese, yeah.
Hey, Brian, I wonder how David would handle a WSR 57 or a WSR 74. His head might explode.
Especially with the old RATS recorder.
Oh, the RATS machine, and you had to get the grease pencils out and everything. You have never, David, you've never tinkered with these things, and there's none operational anymore, so you've had no chance. But you missed quite the era. The RATS machines, it looks like somebody threw up on a piece of paper. That's all I could see with that stuff.
Imagine it's amazing to see the progression and the technology over, the course of a career, where you're looking at, those really early prototypes radar systems where you're more or less looking at radar data for the first time or at the early stages and see where it's come to now. And it's pretty incredible.
And to me, one of the most amazing things is the fact that you've got this in your pocket right here. That's just stunning, with all the products, the dual polarization products and everything else. But we got to take a quick break here, David. I don't know if you have to go, but if you can hang in there for just a few more minutes, we're going to do Picks of the Week. This is where we share something weather related. This could be a website, hardware, software, anything like that. And I see Aubrey hung up on us. Brian, did you make her mad? I
didn't try to.
So she probably had to go. And again, for those that don't know, most of us have real jobs we're working during the show here. But we'll do a quadruple email segment next week. We'll make the whole show email next week. But let's take a quick break for Professor Peters and Tony Rice. We'll come back with the Weather Roundup, Picks of the Week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
WeatherBrains 101 with Professor Peters.
In this episode of WeatherBrains 101, we're going to continue with the third part of a four-part series looking into the operations of aircraft used by NOAA to study and observe tropical weather systems. NOAA's Gulfstream 4 SP, which can fly high, fast, and far with a range of 4,000 nautical miles and a cruising altitude of 45,000 feet, paints a detailed picture of weather systems in the upper atmosphere surrounding developing hurricanes. The Gulf 4's data also supplement the critical low-altitude research data that are collected by NOAA's P3s. Since 1997, the G4 has flown missions around nearly every Atlantic-based hurricane that has posed a potential threat to the United States. The jet's mission covers thousands of square miles surrounding the hurricane, gathering vital high-altitude data with GPS drop windsondes and tail Doppler radar that enable forecasters to map the conditions that influence the movement and changes of hurricanes. NOAA has also used the G4 to gather important data upstream of winter storms and study atmospheric rivers, narrow bands of moisture that regularly form above the Pacific Ocean and flow towards North America's west coast, drenching it with rain and packing it with snow. Now, next week, in our next episode of 101, we'll take a look at the Operations Center for the NOAA aircraft.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
On Tuesday, August 21st, NASA will host a live show beginning at 10 a.m. on NASA TV. The one-year anniversary of the Great American Eclipse. Dwayne Brown, communications official from NASA's Mission Directorate, will host, and he'll be joined by scientists sharing more about the science conducting the eclipse and what we've learned since then. After sunset on Wednesday and again Thursday, look to the waxing gibbous moon. Look below and to the left on Wednesday and to the day, and you'll spot Mars, still looking pretty bright and reddish. That difference day to day is coming mostly from the motion of the moon, of course, but you might notice that Mars is getting a little bit dimmer than it was a couple of weeks ago. That's because it's pulling away from Earth in its orbit around the sun. Also look closely at the moon. Does it look a little smaller? The moon reaches apogee, or the point in its orbit where it's furthest from the Earth, overnight Wednesday into Thursday. If you can spot the size difference, your eyes are way better than mine. Elsewhere, back here on Earth, Weather Ready Fest will take place at the St. Louis Science Center in St. Louis on Saturday, August 25th from 9:30 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. I'll be sharing information about weather conditions throughout the solar system. Be sure to stop by. And for your meteorologist attending the annual meeting and the broadcasters workshop the following day, I'm speaking at 9:15 on the science communications lessons that were learned from the 2017 eclipse. The Weather Enterprise did a marvelous job last year. We can make 2024 even better. The Weather Enterprise did a marvelous job getting the word out, setting expectations, and keeping everybody safe. We can do even better in 2024. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
Weather roundup for August 20th, 2018. David, we talked about you've got maybe a typhoon in a few days. What's the weather like today? What's happening there about midday? How's the weather?
No, it's not bad. It's a little bit cloudy, but it's pretty humid here all the time. But probably in the 80s, so not too bad. But with the typhoon coming, it'll be pretty interesting to see how close that gets on. Should make landfall and come across here around Thursday. So, or I guess that's 2 days from now.
Yeah, the track is pretty close.
Yeah, and when you look for data, do you look to the local Japanese data, or do you look for the Pacific Typhoon Warning Center? Who's best to go to here?
I've been looking at both. I've been looking at the official forecasts from the Japan Meteorological Agency to see what their track looks like, and look at some of their satellite data from the Himawari satellites, as well as looking at the joint or the Typhoon Warning Center. That's and then Hawaii. So looking at their operational products. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. So a front has passed through Norman and Oklahoma City and Wichita Falls. So what's it like on the other side of that front, Rick?
We have glorious mid-60 dew points, which after the summer we've had, that's enjoyable because we've had like Gulf Shores dew points, it seems like, for most of the summer. Mid-upper 70s is just nasty. But Norman's got a 65 dew point now. Down Kevin's Way, it's down a little bit lower than that. But yeah, it's been nice. We've gotten several inches of rain here over much of Oklahoma the past 7 days. And, we've got one more shot of rain coming maybe tomorrow night. And then we're going to get back into a slap back to reality that it's still summer. But man, it's a good break from the really high dew points and the oppressive air.
Just a reminder that fall is on the way.
It is on the way. It's not here yet, though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I noted 6:25 this morning, Mountain Time, the low at Denver International Airport, 46 degrees. Tied the record low temperature for this state, last set in 1939, the year Brian went to work for the Weather Bureau. So, wow. That's Kevin, what's your dew point?
We were in the 50s today. It was great. We had a nice, especially late morning, midday. There was a nice brisk, almost fall feeling wind out of the north, and that felt fantastic. But yeah, by Thursday, we'll be back to triple digits. We haven't been quite as blessed with rain as Rick has in the rest of his CWA. We had a little over 4.5 inches a week ago Monday in a fairly narrow strip through the center of my DMA, but we got some bad drought conditions up Altus Way on toward Childress and north of Vernon, Texas.
Still fires going on too in parts of those areas.
Yes, very, very, very bad.
And you guys have some smoke coming down the backside of that big low, don't you?
It's amazing to see that on the satellite too. And there was one picture a week or so ago. Somebody sent it via email, but the smoke trails coming out of even Canada on the visible satellite loops are just amazing this year.
Yeah. So Brian Peters, we are on the east side of that front. And so far during this program, the storms have actually been behaved. Thank goodness.
Yes, they have. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
And the dew points are in the lower 70s, forecasting lower 60s by Thursday morning. So that should feel very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. We going to have some kind of a loud, thundery night tonight. And then we'll actually have a few days with lower humidity and cooler nights. And again, a little preview of fall here. So that's good stuff. But let's do picks of the week because I am the lead story on the news tonight. If I'm going to ride this out to the end, we got to hustle up. So, Brian, let's start with you. What you got?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about the smoke, but I'm going to pick a site from Wisconsin on the Saharan air layer and all the dust that has helped to be part of the reason why we haven't seen so many tropical systems this year. So I find all these satellite images very fascinating.
Will be in the show notes, weatherbrains.com. All right, let's go to David. I see David already has a pick of the week ready. This guy's good. What you got?
Good man.
So at the upcoming AMS annual meeting, we'll have a phased array radar symposium. So if you're interested in learning more about all the phased array radar research that's been going on for the past decade or so, it'll be a great opportunity to learn about both on the operational side and the research side, the phased array radar research that's been happening. And we'll even have a panel discussion to kind of talk about some of these important questions about, do we need a dual polarization phased array radar, or could we get away with not having dual polarization? So should be a pretty interesting symposium.
Where's AMS 2019? What city?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix. Okay, good deal. All right, Kevin, what's your pick of the week?
I kind of have two. I have a Bloomberg article that sheds some light on the manufactured home topic that we talked about last week. It actually doesn't mention anything about weather, which I kind of thought was interesting. But from a business model standpoint, I think it offers some pretty interesting insights. And I also sent Brian a link to the story that I did in the spring with David at the radar lab. It's not as in-depth as I wanted because we had some scheduling conflicts and I couldn't get back up there and so on and so forth. But if you want to see some cool pictures, especially of that cylindrical unit that they were working on in their facility there, that'll be in that story.
Good deal. All right. Rick Smith, what's your pick of the week?
My pick of the week, I don't know if anybody's done this one yet, but I want to highlight a cool facility here in Norman, the National Weather Museum and Science Center. It's a growing facility, and it makes so much sense to have a weather museum. There's so much equipment and history. So this is a growing facility and a growing entity here. It's a really cool place, and they're starting actually a Weather Hall of Fame here pretty soon. So they'll be inducting the first members into that here in the next couple of months, I think. Anyway, it's a cool place. National Weather Museum. The link will be in the show notes, and they've got a Facebook page and Twitter, and go check them out. And if you're ever in Norman and get a chance to stop by, please do that. I know Aubrey did that when she was down here recently. So very cool place.
Fantastic. And again, the link will be on weatherbrains.com. Mine is a piece by Brian Norcross that appeared in the Capital Weather Gang. If forecasters really want to reach their audience, they should consider the art of numbers. Just a few quotes. People take longer to react and judge odd digits. Even numbers and numbers ending in 5 feel better than odd numbers. Research has shown that people process odd numbers more slowly. So very interesting stuff. And again, it'll be up on weatherbrains.com. And we're going to get Aubrey in here next week to do a long email segment. So please keep your emails coming. And we will be live next Monday night on the 27th at the National Weather Association annual meeting in St. Louis. will be originating from the site there. And Bill's my advanced team. He'll be up there, and I think he's got us a spot. So Rick and Kevin, you guys will not be there. Aubrey will be there. Brian will not. Kim will be. But anyway, we'll be originating from St. Louis next week. So if you're coming to NWA, be sure and stop and say hello. So real quick, David, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, are you on social media or email? Is there a way people can contact you?
Yeah, they could contact me. I use Facebook quite a bit, so you can just search David Bodine on Facebook, or my email, bodine@ou.edu, is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. I could put that in the chat if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. And you're not related to Jethro, are you? And I'm the see, Brian, we're the only two guys old enough to even know what that means. I'm sure David
thought
has
of that myself.
No earthly idea what that means. There was a show back in the 60s called the Beverly Hillbillies, and there was a character named Jethro Bodine who was an interesting kind of guy. But again, I've got to walk across the hall to Studio A and take care of some television business. WeatherBrains is on the air every Monday night, generally speaking. We kick it off at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central. And people can watch. You can watch it on YouTube, or many people go to live.bigbrainsmedia.com. We know most of you listen to the podcast version. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. Our social media accounts are on the website as well. So until next week, live in St. Louis, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you all for listening. Have a marvelous week, and God bless.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, everybody.
Leave it to James to have. We have one of the smartest radar guys in the world, and James closes with the Beverly Hillbillies.
only I would do that, you know.
Only on WeatherBrains.
Yeah,
David, thanks a lot, man. That was really interesting.
Enjoy Japan.